ever thought actually humans and smartphones, we are very much alike? Have you ever thought of that? It sounds a bit crazy, but bear with me. Like smartphone, it has 3 layers. It has the hardware, the operating system, and on top of that, we have the apps. And then for humans, we have the physical body, that's like the hardware of the phone, and then we have emotions. And that is the operating system of humans. And on top of that, we have the apps, which is knowledge for humans. And when you think about it, like we think people are different, right? So different. You are brain scientist, and then you know how to operate people. You know how to build a rocket to land on the moon. You are the developer, you're a designer, accountant, lawyers, whatever. We think we know so different things. But if we look at emotions, we share so much. We have joy and shame and guilt, and we want belonging, we want love, and we feel anxious. We have the same operating system. That's why we understand even though like music touch us, movies touch us, and that's why like poems that were written like 1,000 years ago, it touches us still today. And even though we live in very different times and we know different things, but we share the same emotions. And that's why we connect, right? And I always think like babies, they are like an app, like a phone being unboxed. Even if they don't have any apps installed, but they have the operating system pre-installed, right? So they know how to cry and scream, and they connect with you. So that's the thing. And so that's the operating system. And then yet we don't really talk about this system. And I think it's especially interesting at work, right? I mean, in the 80s, and people think you don't bring your emotions to work. Like that's something you leave at home. And now, like, this is the operating system. You will use it and you can't leave it at home. You can't leave it anywhere at any times. And this is proven by neuroscience now. Like there's a definition, let me read it. Like emotion is actually an involuntary neurological, they're involuntary neurological events. And every system in our body, they respond to the chemical and electrical cascade activated by emotions at all times. And we are actually emotional beings that think occasionally, not we are thinking beings that occasionally feel, right? So even if we're unconscious, we are still feeling. And then when we talk about work, because we can't leave emotions outside, but I do think at work, we have strong armors. We try to hold it in, right? We try not to show it. But the thing with emotion is, and I used this metaphor last time, it's a little bit inappropriate, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I think emotion, like holding emotion in, is like holding fart. Like you can hold it for a certain while, a certain time, but at some point it will be triggered and things will come out. So it's much better, like we resolve it instead of trying to just hold it in, because that's not the best way to deal with our emotions. And I think it's really, really interesting when we work in teams. It's like having a dance with another person, right? Have interaction with other person is like having a dance. And sometimes inevitably we will step on the toes of another person. But then if the other person doesn't tell us, and they keep a poker face, how would we know? Most of the times, like people are not mean. Rarely people just try to make other people's life miserable. It's more like they hurt us without knowing, and then we don't communicate the hurt, And then they just kept on going. And then in the end, we just feel this resentment, and we somehow we will use like passive aggressiveness, and maybe we'll like poke them at meetings, or we try not to talk to them, or we have a cold fight, cold war, and we don't look at into each other's eyes for like 1 month, who knows? And these things happen, and then they are actually just very natural and normal. And then that's why the act of being brave enough and go to have a conversation is so important. So we just let other know, like, hey, you step on my toes, and then they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. And then the problem will be solved. But yet to communicate emotion is such a scary thing, right? And then, whew, I think the most scary part is we don't want to start an argument. We don't want to start a war. And especially, we don't want to be attacked during that time. And then according to Brene Brown, and she would say, like, she works with a lot of Fortune 10 companies, and her book was Wall Street Journal #1 bestseller. And then she will say the core of this work is about the skill. It's about the skill of have tough conversation. And I think, and she said that builds courage, and courage is not just you are born with it or you don't have it. It's something we can actually work on, we can build. And I really think it's a bit like, for example, we go rock climbing, and if we have better skills, we will be more daring in our moves. It just, we never really get an education on these things, all of us. But if we really look at it, it's actually very learnable. And according to her research, is learnable, measurable, and teachable. I think the important thing with have tough conversation and not to start an argument is to state the truth, right? Owning the truth. And then there's nothing to argue about. This is not disputable. Then it's so much easier to stay peaceful, stay safe. And in my head, this is how it's like. And like two people, oh, shit. Two people having a tough conversation. And then they stay on, oh, you can't see it. Yeah, anyway. Basically, I draw a river, and in the middle of it has bombs. And then there are two people on two sides. So the principle is try not to get across the river. If you go to the other side of the river, and then you will start a war. And then to make the conversation owning, like staying truth, I think there are very important 3 things. And the number 1 thing is about talking about how we feel, right? How we feel is our own truth. That's not disputable. Like, I feel hurt. I felt shunned. I felt mocked. I felt cornered. I feel anxious. These things, no one can argue about it. And then the thing is sometimes it's very easy to talk about thoughts as feelings. And that's something we really need to avoid, right? And to say, like, I feel you are wrong. That's not a feeling. That's a judgment. Or I feel I don't agree. That's not a feeling. And then the interesting thing is, according to Brene Brown's research, and she has been doing this for 20 years and 400 pieces of data, what she learned is, for most people, we only have 3 words to describe how we feel, and that is angry, sad, and happy. But I think this thing is like recognizing colors, right? If we have more vocabularies for colors, and then we will be able to recognize more colors. And that's just how it is. And for example, if we only have red, green, yellow, blue, and then we don't see the nuances. But then if we up our vocabulary, we will see like there's baby blue, there's sky blue, there is like peacock blue. And then when we have more vocabularies, we will start to have more ability to see to distinguish the nuances. And according to psychology nowadays, they call it emotion literacy. And then if we can recognize 30 kind of emotions, if we can really recognize and name them, we have the emotional literacy. I think it's kind of harsh to think like, oh, a lot of us, we're not literate on that. And I want to share a few words about emotions and see how, like, and you can have a feeling in your heart if you can recognize them and really know the difference. So these are some of the core emotions: anger, anxious, belonging, blame. I didn't know blame was an emotion. And curious, disappointed, disgust, embarrassment, empathy, excited, fear, frustrated, gratitude, grief, guilt, happy, humiliation, hurt, jealous, joy, judgment, lonely, love, overwhelmed, regret, sad, shame, surprise. And that one, vulnerability. I didn't know vulnerability is considered a feeling. Huh. I think that's really interesting. And I looked into it. And by definition, vulnerability is the feeling we have when we take risks, when we face uncertainty, and when we have emotional exposure. And then the more I think about it, I just feel emotion is the feelings like when we do a bungee jump, right? And then it's the feeling when we are in the air. And that's why vulnerability is the birthplace for love and connection and creativity and all these things we actually want in life. Because if we don't tolerate the feeling of being in the air, then we cannot actually jump. And then we will not have the result after that jump. So I think this is so interesting, at least for me. And then worried. So these are the key emotions. So the number one principle of having to have a conversation is to state one's own feelings and just communicate to the other person how we feel. And that's a huge step forward already. The second principle, and Brene Brown, she wrote a whole book about this, and it's just like one little sentence, and that's such a game changer, which is, when we get hurt by someone's action, and then we will have our assumptions, but then when we communicate like why we feel hurt, we communicate that assumption as a conclusion, and normally that just starts a war. And for example, like if my friend didn't reply me for 24 hours, and then I will say, if I just say, you didn't reply me for 24 hours, I feel you don't care about me. And then that can really start an argument, right? Like why did you say that? It's your own insecurity, blah, 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 and then a fight will start. But then if we add this one little sentence, everything will change. And that little sentence is the story I tell myself is. So it's like, you didn't reply me for 24 hours. And the story I tell myself is you didn't care about me. Is that true? And then in that way, we will be able to communicate why we get hurt, but we also leave room for the other person to explain, right? So that's a way to state the truth. Like the truth is, you did this, I get hurt, and I made a story in between. So to just say that it's a story I made up, but it doesn't mean I shouldn't feel hurt. This is exactly how I feel. But then to add that sentence is such a game changer. So we know when we want to communicate the hurt and the logic why I get hurt, this sentence will help us to stay safe. And then the third one is to say what we really want, to not like beat around the bush, and especially like start rational arguments. What's right, what's wrong, what shouldn't, but say what we actually want. But this is very, very difficult, I think. And for example, like to say, I want an apology for this thing you have done the other day. And instead of saying pull request is not important. Or I heard this, and I heard another story is this guy, every time he goes to bed and his wife will answer some emails in bed, and then he will like argue about time management strategies, like what is the correct thing to do, what is rational, what's right, what's wrong, and how this half an hour will like not up your game about time management, blah 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 blah. And they have so many arguments, and then in the end, like one day he just really faced his own feelings and then said what he actually wants. He said, I want your attention, I want your attention. And then that's it. And then his wife just put her phone down and they stopped the argument about time management. And then she was like, here I am. So it's much, much easier. But this is very hard to do because sometimes I think a lot of times we don't even realize that ourselves, like what is actually what I'm trying to get. And also I heard only yesterday in a podcast, they said when the truth is different than your identity, and then you will try to argue your way around it. And for example, if you think you're a very generous person, and then there was one thing you did that was not really generous, and then we can't accept that about ourselves, then we will really try to walk around it and to try to be rational, like why that was a good thing. Yeah. So 3 important things to to communicate the truth. Number 1, to talk about feelings, non-disputable. And the second, if it's an assumption, say it's an assumption and use the sentence, the story I tell myself is. And the third one is say what we really want. But the third one really takes self-awareness and it takes more vulnerability. It's scarier to say what we really want than to say you're wrong and this shouldn't be done in that way and all this. The power of communicating clearly. I want to tell a story, and I got the consent from my colleagues, and this was actually something happened. So there was once I was the only designer in the team, and I designed all these apps and the internal project and everything. And there was one feature, I forgot which one. Anyway, it's quite a big feature. So I worked quite a long time on that. And then I had a presentation with the team, and it's me, and then it's a bunch of, it's 5 other people from front end, back end, and from everyone. And then they have a lot of questions. That was legit questions, but somehow it became this heated debate. And in the middle of it, I started to feel I was cornered. I was cornered by 5 people. And then also, like very watertight, like excellent programmers are so watertight in the logic, and also they are rhetorically very, very strong. And then when I was put on the spot, and then I get like the emotion starts to boil up, and then it was harder and harder to find words. But then if I say something, they will quote me, and there are 5 people listening to what I was saying, and then they will say, but you said this earlier. And then I just have harder and harder times to find my word, and I could feel really, really flooded. And I mean, I had 2 choices at that time. Either I really like defend my space and we start a war, or I would say like I'm in charge of the design and that's that. So either it can go that way, but at that moment I just remember like, hey, tough conversation, and also you are flooded and we're all flooded, this is not gonna go anywhere. So I was like, hold on guys, like we can't hear each other anymore, like we have to take a break, let's take a 20-minute break and let's come back to this. And then already I felt much better, because I really felt like that's not a discussion about the app anymore, it's me trying to survive, and then they try to get their point across, and then I would just defend more and more. And also in the process there were two colleagues, and it was especially hard for me. So I called each one of them into a separate room, and I had the tough conversation. And for the first one, I said, at the meeting, I felt cornered, I felt fear, and then I felt very defensive. And I said, how do you feel? And he said, I felt you wouldn't listen to anything. You were so like this, nothing gets in. So when we communicated that, it was already better to just say the emotion out. And according to research, when we label the negative emotions gets less already. So just to say I felt fear, the fear gets lower. And then after that, I also said to him, like, I'm really precise with my emotions, but I'm not that precise with the words I'm choosing. And then if you quote on me and put me on the spot and say I contradicted myself, I will have harder and harder time to find my words. So please be gentle on me on that. And he really hurt me. And I also said that to a different colleague. And then 20 minutes later, we went back into the discussion, and then I could already feel a huge difference. Like, I didn't feel cornered anymore. I didn't feel like we can't hear each other. And then they really took care of my emotion by giving me space to let me finish, and not to really like pinpoint every word I choose. And also because I was not in a heightened emotional state, I could also hear them much better. And in the end, they had points, they had valid points about my design. And I also had my points where I stood. So in the end, we reached a much better result than either of us could do. So then we really collaborated as a team well, right? And then that was a big learning for me. Yeah, so the power of communicating the emotions. And I think like before I started to look into this topic, I had the times when I had passive aggressive periods with colleagues, and now looking back, it just feels like it's not worth it. And then also the more I do tough conversations, the braver I become, because I do feel I have skill in this. I got this. I know how to handle it. And then I have more courage to go in. And almost every time, the result, I mean, okay, not every time for sure. Like I would say 80% of the times it solved the problem right away. And then a lot of times just like a little misunderstanding. And then the other person didn't get like, oh, you feel that way. I didn't know. And then problem solved, and we can go back to be really good colleagues again. So I think it's such a like a superpower to do this in a team. And I don't know if you guys have heard of the Google's research called Aristotle. And it's during that research, they have coined the term psychological safety. So it's 2015, and then they used 180 teams in Google, and then they tried to figure out what is the common denominator for high performance teams. And then they have done this research for 2 years, and a lot of data, and together with their own knowledge of what works, what doesn't work. And they are looking for all kinds of traits, like so much data. And then it turned out the most effective teams, the number one trait is not like how many star performers you have, or how like senior the person is or how few mistakes you make, is how high the psychological safety is. That stood out way above other factors. So I think, and we can see more clearly now, right? Like, have tough conversation is at the core of building psychological safety. I mean, in this industry, I think a lot of people have heard of the term, but then the question is always like, but how do you build that? How do you improve that? It sounds so daunting and huge and elusive and mysterious. But I think in the end, it's so much about just communicating the emotions openly. Then people will be like, oh, okay, I stepped on your toes in that way, then I will not do that next time. So everybody feels safer in the whole environment. Yeah. But then I have to say, this talk I gave 1 year ago, and then I was, so pumped, and I use those methods for quite some time already, and they achieved really positive result. So I got even braver, and I went in. And of course, there are some face down moments for sure. I mean, this is human emotions, like human relations. It's never that clean. There's no like foolproof method, like you will never fail. There's no such a thing about human relations, right? I mean, if it's like that clean, then it's computer programs, or I mean, we wouldn't have poetry, we wouldn't have music, we wouldn't have films. Like, that's also the beauty of it, just how messy humanity is. So I also want to talk about how to get back up when things go south. And sometimes it does. And I have to say, I found this interesting. Like, I find it easier at work, because with your colleagues, if you say, we need to talk, and then you book a meeting to talk about it, and that person cannot really choose to run away. But with your personal lives, your friends have more power to just, I don't want to talk about this. So it's harder, and it's actually cleaner and easier at work. And from my own experience, people really handled it respectfully and bravely. And one thing, okay, if the tough conversation go south, if you get attacked back, if the other person completely denies what happens, or you start an argument, and you will have heightened emotions afterwards. And but there are several ways to deal with this. And first, I want to talk about the first aid. And I really wish someone told me, like, when I was a child, this is the lifesaver. And it's so learnable. Like, why don't we talk about this? Why don't we talk about this in school? It's so crazy. And then this is a breathing technique. Apparently the US military uses, the special force in US military, they use to calm down the emotion when they face extreme situations. And there are many different names for it. They call it box breathing, but I found it not so good. So I call it 4-second breathing technique. And it's very, very easy. So you just breathe in for 4 seconds, and you hold it for 4 seconds, and you breathe out 4 seconds, and you hold it for 4 seconds. So basically, for breathing, breathe out is 4 seconds, and you add 4-second gaps in between when you hold it. And then the thing is, when you use this, really, in 1 to 2 minutes, your heightened emotions will come down. And I have been using this so much in my real life, and it works like a charm. And you can use it in the meeting. This thing doesn't need you to go to a room and like meditate or do some exercise or punch some pillows. No, you can be in the meeting, and you'll be like, holding my breath, and then you breathe out, and after a minute you calm down so much more already. And I would like us to try this a little bit. So try to connect with your feelings and think of something that is upsetting you today. Think of something with someone, whatever that is kind of upsetting you. And I will share my screen and we will follow the rhythm and you can try a little bit. Hold it. Breathe out. Hold it. Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. Hold it. Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. Hold it. Breathe in. Hold it. Breathe out. Hold it. You feel a little difference. Like it's just that holding, it's somehow so magical. And then the moment when I realized I internalized the technique is one day I had a dream. And in the dream, inside the dream, there was a little girl that was super, super scared. And she ran to me and I held her. Immediately, I was like, breathe, like breathe in for a second and hold it, and breathe out and hold it. And when I woke up, I've really internalized it. I can't even do it in a dream now. Yeah. So I really use this these days. If I feel like my emotions getting heightened in a meeting, or like when I have problem to sleep, sometimes I use this and it just works. Or when you feel nervous, like, yeah, before this, I did it a little bit. You can do it anywhere. It's just so wonderful. I think this is something worth spreading, especially teach the kids, like thinking how much money we will save. And like we use so many different ways to numb the emotions, right? Like to scroll Instagram and Facebook, and then like mindless gaming, and then or to lash out on someone, or to go shopping, or yeah, and of course alcohol. I mean, alcohol is also fun, but a lot of times we do use ineffective method to calm down the emotion. And I really feel this is so useful. And sometimes you just get up Saturday morning and you feel so restless. You don't know where this comes from. And you remember to breathe. And after a while, feel like the world opens up. It's not that bad. Yeah, so highly recommend it. That's the first aid. And then another thing is empathy. Empathy works so well with when we get really upset, and then we share the story with someone who can show empathy to us, right? And then that can really make a huge difference. But it's important that we show to people, we tell the story to people we trust, and the people who can show us empathy instead of sympathy. And here I want to share a little video, 2-minute video. And I mean, I'm a geek about psychology. I spent 10 years of my free time just to watch all these videos on YouTube and soak in the knowledge. And I would say, if I get to recommend one video that changes things, it will be this one. Yeah, a good life lesson.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, I'm down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, It's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now. I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Yeah, that's the video. I think it's so important we know this, right, for ourselves, and then also for our friends and family and colleagues. This makes a vital difference, is to show empathy but not sympathy. And every time we show empathy, it will make things better. Yeah. And then the third one of how to get back up is something I just learned recently. I have to say it's life-changing. It's this concept, and it's based on research. Like, there are two different things. When we get stressed, when we feel anxiety in life, there is a stressor and there is a stress. And those things are different. Like, we have stressors in life, for example, relationship, work, money, kids, all these things. It can give us stress, right? And then when the stress comes, we feel that in our body, and then we have to complete the stress cycle. And that thing is independent from the stressor, because a lot of times we think we need to solve the stressor so we can solve the stress. But actually, those are two different things. Like, if we solve the stressor, but we don't solve the stress stays. And then if we still have the stressor and we still have the agency and the opportunity to solve the stress. And this gives us so much freedom, right? Because a lot of times the stressor is not something we can easily and quickly solve in life. But even in that situation, we will have a way to complete the stress. And because I like metaphors, I'm a designer, and this is what the mental image I have. I feel like whenever we enter a stressor, and for example, you have a fight with a colleague, or you have a fight with your partner, or there's like, who knows, like money problem, and then it gives us a can of trash, like the can of trash in Mac. But this time we have to alter it a little bit and thinking every stressor will give you one trash can, and then you have to go and delete the trash can, and then that starts a progress bar. And then you have to move that progress bar until the end, and then you delete the stress. And then the thing is, to deal with how to delete the trash is a very different skill than to like not to have stressors that gives us trash can. It's we have to speak body language. We have to do something that our body understands, so the emotions will come down. And then the kind of method we can use is not rational thinking. It's hugs, like long hugs, like 20-second hugs, and then 6-second kisses. Or you can talk to a friend and then you get empathy, or you can do exercise, or you can do the breathing technique, or you just go to the cafe and have a friendly person talking to you, or cry. Actually, like tears, they are the free painkiller. They're the painkiller. It's for free. It doesn't have side effects, and it's available to us. And then if we just let out the emotions, and actually if we don't feed the thought, we wouldn't cry forever. It will stop in like 1 or 2 minutes. So like to say boys don't cry is really a disservice to humanity, I would say. Like this is the free painkiller. It's very good for dealing with stress. It's very good dealing with our emotions. And yeah, so this thought gives me so much this feeling of freedom, like, so I don't have to solve a lot of the big problems in life before I can feel better, right? And then they also say, like, for example, people have a PhD dissertation they have to hand in, and they were super stressed, and then they think once they hand in that, everything will be fine. But what happened is they hand in that and they get sick. Like they haven't dealt with the stress itself. And then the stress itself, I really feel like it's the trash can we have to like keep deleting every day, and when there are too many progress bars, and then you don't delete them and they will burn out. And really, like the computer will die. Like I can't handle this anymore. So it's very important we like complete the stress cycle and then delete the trash every day. And then we have such agency in this. And I wonder if there is a way I can share some of the podcast or videos later, because all this is not my invention, and I think they're life-changing, some good content. Yeah. And then one last thing is sometimes if we have a fight with a colleague or partners or friends or family, and then we go have tough conversation, and sometimes we get deeply hurt. We can get deeply hurt by their action and words, and then you confront them, and then they really like, no, they just don't want to deal with it, and then they don't want to apologize, and then you get really hooked up, like worked up, and then you really want to push them to say the thing you want to hear and all that. And sometimes it gets so draining, and they wouldn't. But then there is a way, it's called assertive claiming, which means even if they don't say I'm sorry, even if they don't say this is not right, but you can go and defend your own boundaries. And then I want to share one letter, and I even think this can be a really powerful template when we communicate the hurt with someone, but with such dignity, and it's vulnerable, but it's also dignified. And when you read that, and you really feel like, wow, respect. This is how I feel about this powerful communication. It's a student, and she went to see her her beloved teacher, and telling that person about the challenges she was facing in life, and including self-harm behaviors. And then she wanted to have support, but instead of getting the support from this teacher, she was shamed by this person, and then she was told she was not strong, and it's like a really bad fall. And then they tried to communicate, there was no result, and then in the end she sent this, and I think it's just so powerful. Like, I'm writing this note because you have been such an important person in my life. I think it's very important to set that tone. And then I came back to see you needing your support. It hurt me to be told I have disappointed you, as if I'm some kind of failure. I left your office feeling like I'm a smaller person who didn't live up to your standards. Maybe that's what you believe, but it didn't help me to hear it. I also need to tell you that I don't believe I'm a lesser person because of my behavior. And especially the last sentence, just draw the line, like, no, but this is how I think of me. It's so powerful, and we can use this a few sentences as like a template to communicate hurt, especially some deep hurt. And even without the other person's acknowledgement, apology, we can feel so much better already. And this is also from a very famous psychologist who studied apology for 30 years. Yeah, I found that was a super tool. Yeah, so that's our webinar about how to have tough conversations. And I really think clear is kind. We are doing this for ourselves and also for the people around us. And then to have tough conversation is a brave choice. It's not easy, but the reward is extremely high. It's worth it. Yeah. So thank you today for joining the webinar and join this topic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.